Kyle Whittingham spoke to the Utah media earlier today, and he stayed pretty mum on Cam Rising's health as normal. So what does that mean? Are we going to see Cam this weekend? Is Isaac Wilson ready to go? How is this Utah football team doing 2 weeks into the season? All that and more coming up on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to this show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show on X. And we do appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're in the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football, Locked On Big 12, both have you covered for the conference and game we love so much. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. You can go to 5hourenergy.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. That's 5hourenergy.com. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to have Michelle Bodkin joining me for today's show to decipher what Kyle Whittingham said during his weekly press conference. We got to hear from some of the players as well and just look ahead to this game with Utah State. And obviously, Michelle, the talk of the press conference and just wanting to hear from Coach Whit was always going to be, what's he going to say on Cam Rising? Mm-hmm. And he took a very familiar approach and said that I'm going to stay mum on all injuries unless they're season ending. So that's the positive. And we didn't think it'd be season ending based on how everything played out. It's still such a crazy and freak injury with how he collided with the Gatorade, the player late pushing him, even though it wasn't a flag and it absolutely should have been for unnecessary roughness. But I'm not surprised to see Coach stay mum. This is what he always does. Said he's not going to comment, and we'll wait and see. I would still be surprised if we see Cam this weekend. And that's not even me being like, oh, I'm a doctor and like this injury and that. Other people are more qualified to do that. This is me just saying, I know how cautious Utah's already been with Cam's health. They pulled him at half of the Southern Utah game for a reason. They've talked constantly about not wanting him to run, even though Cam can't help himself when he's on the field and still throws his body around all the time. I think Utah is going to take a cautious approach this week, and I expect to see Isaac Wilson, but it's also Kyle Whittingham in Utah, so they're going to do their own thing, and they're really not going to let anyone know about it because they think that provides them with a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to find out when we find out, and that's going to be Saturday up in Logan when the first snap takes place. To be honest, I think if Cam shows that he's okay to go, I think he plays. Like, he missed an entire year last year, and you know that killed him. He's not missing any more time if he doesn't have to. He's just not. And I think, realistically speaking, you know, a little more tune-up time in order to get him up and ready to go for when it starts to get real, which is the following week at Stillwater for Oklahoma State. You know, you might as well get a little more practice in if you're good to go. If the hand needs a little bit of rest, they'll be fine. They'll get Isaac Wilson the reps. They'll make sure that the pieces are around him to help him out. Look, he's a freshman. He technically should have still been in high school up until about June this year. You know, so he's still learning some things. He's still going to have to, you know, develop his mind and his body and all that kind of stuff that comes with jumping from high school to college ball. But I think he's shown flashes of things that look promising. And I think things that this Utah team can absolutely work with. He just needs more reps. And I mean, Whit kind of explained what happens in the week. Right now, as the backup, Isaac's only getting 30 to 20% of the reps. It's Cam that's getting, 80 to 70% of the reps. And so, you know, it's hard to really get going when you're kind of the last person to get things in and get things done and get that practice in. And there's good reason for that. You only have so many hours in the day that you can be with these players. And you have to be judicious about, you know, how you divvy things up. But the other part of it is, I mean, Isaac, both times he's been put into the game, and I honestly think it's for his betterment. Like, it sucks in the moment, but neither situation has exactly been the best situation.
No.
And Whittingham's come out and admitted that as well. But I think he's a smart kid, and I think he's really absorbing these things in a very positive, smart, intelligent way. And I think if he's the one that has to go, if they do decide we're just not going to roll out Cam, we're going to let him rest the hand for a week and really get ready for Stillwater and Oklahoma State, I think he'll be fine. I honestly, like, those extra reps will be good for him. And just having the game plan a little more tailored to him. Whit said that he doesn't expect that to change a whole lot, but just going through the motions of it and not being thrown into a crappy situation is going to make a huge difference for this freshman that I think has so much potential.
I think he has loads of potential too. And I agree. He's going to be, with the game plan crafted around him, he'll be better. Because if there's a few things that Kyle Whittingham said that I'm like, that's coach speak. You're doing that. That is one of the biggest ones when he said the game plan will not be a lot different, because all the time they talk about how the playbook is not as open when anyone but Cam Rising is under center, or when Utah doesn't do that a ton, in the shotgun. So they're obvious. It's going to be different. That's where I think it's so funny that he's like, it's not going to be crazy different, when all the time they tell us that it will be different when he's out there, because we're not opening up the playbook as much. But you talked about something incredibly important, the amount of practice time. It is crazy when you talk about that. When he was making plays in the spring game, I don't know the Corner Canyon prom timing, but he hadn't even gone to prom yet, I don't think. Like, that's wild to think he was competing with this stuff, and he hadn't even walked across the stage for his high school graduation. So the fact that he is here, he's also shown signs of growth in each game. We'll talk about Isaac's play in a moment. But I think the thing that I've really thought a lot about is I see people saying if Cam gets hurt, Utah has no chance, just like last year was abysmal. I feel like we've done revisionist history with last year, and we're like, 8-4 was so bad. Yeah. The 4 losses need context. Like, it is not like Utah lost to Cal. They're not Auburn in 2024. Utah lost at Washington, one of the best teams in the country, to Oregon, one of the best teams in the country, who would have both those teams in the new playoff format, and Washington made the national championship game. Arizona, when they were red hot at the end of the season, who literally they finished the year as a top 20 team, and at Corvallis, which the only team to win at Corvallis in like the past 3 years, whatever it is last year's Washington team. Those were the losses. And someone could say, the Northwestern Bowl game. Sure, Satao Laumea didn't play. Devon Vele didn't play. There were tons of other injured players. Mekhi Bernard, it was his first game back from injury. Bryson Barnes even was going through the transfer portal process. I'm never going to put a lot of stock into bowl games when we have so many opt-outs that it's not indicative or representative. There wasn't even Cole Bishop, Sione Vaki, or Jonah Ellis of what this team was. So I just feel like this will be as bad as last year. Last year wasn't as bad, and I wouldn't even expect 4 losses maybe, because the schedule's not as hard as it was last year. There's one top 20 road game that Utah has on their schedule, and it's Oklahoma State. So to act like this Utah team would have no shot with Isaac Wilson there, when you really look at what they did last year, I just think is totally false.
I think it gets immensely harder.
For sure.
And it's just because you're dealing with someone that doesn't know the thing. Yeah. But I mean, realistically, yes, last year sucked. It sucked because it felt like every week 20 more players were added to the unhealthy list. And it's like, oh God, like, who else is left to play? Like, who else are we sending in to help get this thing done? But I mean, realistically speaking, when you start thinking about the number of 3rd string, 4th string, 5th string guys that were going in and keeping Utah in games, you went toe-to-toe with Washington at Washington. And I think that Huskies team, for as good as they were, they played up and down to their competition a little bit.
They did.
But I mean, mathematically speaking, Utah was still in the race at that point in time. They win that game, things get very interesting. And that's not to say, like, no, that team was not a championship caliber team. It wasn't. But how many teams do you know that can do that with that level of player? Like, you even think about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Utah season's done. It's over. Like, we are folding it up by the time October hits. So the fact that these guys were still technically in it and could possibly do some things and at the very least muddy up the waters in the Pac-12, crazy. Like, there's teams that wish that they had that ability, and they just don't. Even with their best players, even with their starters in. So I think that really speaks to the depth. And on top of that, you're also talking about a lot of guys that weren't necessarily going to be relied on last year. That was not the plan, but they get all this time and experience. And I think it's showing up this year. So yes, it's going to be a tougher road if Isaac Wilson has to lead Utah the rest of the way. Do I think it's as much of a slam dunk that Utah goes to the championship and wins under Isaac Wilson? Not so much. Again, I think there's some other teams in this league that you kind of crack the door open and make it possible for it. I think they could step in easily.
Would you say 5 best though? Still, I still think one of the 5 best, even without Cam. I genuinely
would say so. I think I would say so, and especially again once those reps start going to Isaac. Again, we are not implying anything. Cam Rising is not out for the season. Like, this is just hypothetical land that we're speaking of, because there has just been this weird mass panic over this thing. But I think you give him the reps, you give him the practice, the more games he plays in, the more comfortable he's going to get. And Whittingham more or less said exactly that. It's not that he's not capable, it's that he lacks the experience in the practice. And once he starts getting that under his belt, and I think, this is the reason why, to be honest, I kind of suspect Cam probably could have gone back into the game last week if it was a dire situation, but I think they felt like they could manage it. And ultimately, what's going to be better, possibly making Cam's situation worse, or maybe making the game a little bit closer than it would have been, but letting your future prospect get some valuable reps in. And I think you're going to see that a lot more this year, because I think they understand the importance of, they haven't really had that luxury before to be able to let their future get some work in. So it's, I think you're going to see a lot of Cam trying to run up the score, and then you let Isaac go out and kind of take care of, and he's going to get to play a little bit more. This last time it was close enough that I think they kept things under wraps a little bit more. But I think that's going to be the plan kind of going forward, with maybe a few games as an exception.
I totally agree. And last thing, because I know I if I had a producer, I don't, he'd be screaming in my ear to get to an ad break. When I say top 5 teams in the Big 12, like we talked about, like if there's any Big 12 fan on here who's like, that's crazy, how could you say Utah would still be in the top 5? Because let's look at the other top 5 teams in the Big 12. Oklahoma State, shout out to Quentin Jackson, but Arkansas nearly beat them. Arkansas is a middle to bottom tier SEC team, just the fact of their quarterback play and everything out there. Also, I hear all the time everyone talk about Oklahoma State, they have so much experience in returning talents like that. Well, they got their doors blown off by UCF and South Alabama. Utah has not had a bad loss like that ever under the Cam Rising tenure like that. And even, yes, did they lose that game to South Dakota State? Sure. That was all the way back in 2021, though. And there are a few key pieces, but not all the same. Illinois beat Kansas. That was not a good loss for Kansas. Kansas State nearly lost to Tulane. Are you serious, Kansas State? You're supposed to be maybe the best team in this conference, arguably, people say, and you do that. And Arizona nearly lost to Northern Arizona. Shout out my brother's school, but that is not good. So that's the state of the top 5 of the conference. So to say that Utah, who even with Isaac Wilson in, they should have still gotten 2 field goals. Cole Becker wasn't able to hit them, but I expect him to make those next time. So I just think that's where I think some of this stuff gets crazy, to think Utah would have no chance. If Georgia was in the conference and some of these other teams, I was going to say Oregon, but not with how Oregon's looking right now. If Ohio State was in the conference, these genuine powerhouses, that's different, but there's not that in the Big 12. So I just think that's important to keep in mind too. But Isaac obviously is still an important piece of the puzzle. So let's talk a little bit more about his performance from the first 2 weeks and how we project to that if the game plan is revolved around him on Saturday. That's what we're going to be diving into in one moment. But first, I want to talk with you all about our friends at Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Hey, Locked On Utes fans. I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the coach of the Utah Utes? From recruiting players and hiring coaches to your staff to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about this game. You are responsible for calling offensive plays during the game. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football Head Coach is completely free, has no ads, and 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer at Locked On Utes where you can use my promo code Locked On CFB, not P, CFB, all caps. Go inside the game store to receive the free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this, as these perks will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com, ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football Head Coach, begin your coaching legacy today. All right, Michelle, keeping it rolling here. Let's talk a little bit about Isaac Wilson now, because we talked about the team around him and why this Utah team with Wilson in there could still be really successful in the Big 12. We never said that they should be the favorites in the last segment. We're just saying you can't write this team off as a non-factor when what they've shown in the past and the current state of the Big 12. Speaking of the past, Kyle Whittingham, I thought, made a great point when discussing Saturday's game during his press conference on Monday. He said, everyone needs to pick up the slack, not just Isaac. That is so important to me. And people act like Isaac is the only reason that the offense wasn't producing, when the truth is it's up to the other parts too. The very first, when Isaac comes in for Cam, Utah has a holding penalty the very first play. So that becomes 2nd and 20, then 3rd and 20. Isaac makes a great play. I think would have ended up being a first down throw to Dorian Singer. What happened? The defensive back grabbed Dorian Singer. So move the chains up, then gets Utah in better position. I also think Isaac would have continued that drive had Tano Tongai not gotten driven into Isaac's lap, and the defensive lineman gets his hand up, bats the ball away. Pittman was wide open on the slant in the middle of the field. That's where Wilson was going with the ball. Wilson gets sacked later on. The running game was up and down. Last drive, fantastic. Other drives, you can see plays where guys on the interior are getting blown up. The tackles are failing to set the edge. So it is on the team to elevate their play, especially without Cam. Utah needs to be able to lean on the running game even more consistently. I loved what I saw that final drive, but the truth is the offensive line and the offense as a whole in a lot of ways is still a bit of a work in progress. So I do think it gets lost in the shuffle that, like, hey, the other pieces also have to step up.
Yeah. And I mean, Whit mentioned that as well, is it felt like the air went out of the offense and we can't have that happening. Like, those guys have to still kind of act like nothing's changed and nothing's different. And I think we even saw that a little bit on the defensive side as well. It's just like everybody, I think there was a moment of panic amongst everybody, right? Like, you didn't know what was going on with Cam. You're watching him get walked to the locker room. And it's like, oh crap, is our season over before it even starts? Like, are we done seeing, the guy that we really rally around and all that kind of stuff? And I think everybody kind of started to settle in a little bit when it became very clear Cam came back. He was laughing and smiling on the sidelines. Clearly not the demeanor of someone that's going to be missing a ton of time, if any. And so I think everybody, it just kind of cleared the air. But like, Utah has to understand they will be playing opponents that you can't take your foot off the gas. And it doesn't matter if Cam's in the game or not. Like, if Isaac has to go in, you have to act like Isaac is Cam. And I get it's a little bit different. There's going to be some adjustments and whatnot there. But you have to have that same level of trust in Isaac that you do in Cam. And I think Isaac's giving you very good reason to have that trust in him. If you listen to him in the post-game press conference, fully acknowledges that he could have been better, should have been better. I could have helped my defense out by keeping our offense on the field. I mean, but he did it in a way that it was still very confident. It wasn't that, oh, this really bothers me and I'm going to hang my head and I'm going to be, a sorry sack, talking about everything I did wrong and I'm such a fit. It was like, I'm going to get better at this. How can you not rally around a guy like that, And I think that's a very different demeanor than Utah honestly has had in a backup quarterback in a while. I think Bryson Barnes, who obviously I think Utah's probably facing on Saturday against Utah State, had a bit of that in him. But you also have to add in Isaac has, I think, a much bigger, wider skill set than Bryson did. And it's going to bode well for him, but you have to rally around him. And again, it can't be oh crap, Cam's out. Like, we're just going to fold it in. Like, no, you have to keep going hard. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. And I think Whit's absolutely right. Utah has to figure out how to keep playing when Cam's not in the game, because he can't always be in the game.
You're absolutely right that the rest of the team can't take the step back, because in a lot of ways they did. And going back to the Cam's injury, one last thing, Michelle, just being in the stadium for that, what was that like? Could you just feel the entire energy get sucked out of the building?
We were all like, okay, this is where it ends. That is awesome. Because, I mean, like, the guy full on crashed into a water cooler, and it kind of came down on top of him. And you're watching people, like, try to pull him up. Like, what's happening here? And then the camera kind of catches a good angle of him on the Jumbotron. And much like the championship game against USC, is popped up, smiling and stuff, shaking his hand. And you're like, okay, maybe it's like a hand issue. And I mean, they went and checked him out. Then you kind of watch him go to the locker room and you're like, uh-oh, like maybe this isn't so good anymore again. And then he came back out, and it's again, the attitude and the demeanor was fine. There were fans that actually were yelling at him, Cam, give us a thumbs up if you're okay.
Yeah.
And Andrea Urban with Fox 13 caught that on film and put it out there. So Cam's fine. Cam is fine ultimately. But I think there was a big energy shift. You could see it in the team. I think you could feel it in the stadium, especially when nobody knew exactly what was going on. And of course, after a season like last year, it's hard not to kind of revert back to like that state of constant panic whenever someone's being escorted off the field. And of course, it's like your main guy that you like do not want being out for the rest of the year.
No, you're right. It's such a wild scene, and hopefully one we don't have to deal with again this year, because we know we know how harder everything gets if Cam Rising is not in the game. And I am excited to see Isaac continue to grow, because I do think with a game plan crafted around him, we've seen what a good offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig is. Utah has players that can win one-on-one on the outside. When you have that, you continue to grow Isaac's pocket presence, I think is something that's the thing to me that needs the most work. Is anytime there's any kind of pressure, he doesn't want to hang in the pocket and just like shuffle his feet and then reset and fire downfield. It's, I got to run. So just getting more comfortable, which that happens with reps and experience. And I'm really excited to see if we do see just Isaac this weekend, how that game plan gets worked around. But I mean, you were adamant what you just said, that Cam is fine. So let's look to the Oklahoma State game. Based on, I still think there's a chance that Cam could miss that game too. This is zero inside information. This is just me looking at it he got his throwing hand was injured, getting it back up to speed and back up to health. Even for a 2-week game, I do think there's a question of whether or not he plays in that game. So I'm not ready to say like we will for sure see him back then too. Do you think okay, do you feel pretty confident? Would you say that you think we'll see Cam back then? Or are you still like, okay, let's just wait and see what happens this weekend?
I'm kind of more of a wait and see person. I would be really, really shocked if he doesn't play the following week.
Oklahoma State,
just because it's such an important game. But then again, I don't know exactly what's going on with him either. And so I can't speak to, I know it's not bad. I know it's not going to keep him out for a great length of time. But could it be 2 weeks? Sure. That's within the realm of reason. But again, just knowing how competitive he is, knowing how important this year is, I just would be really surprised if there isn't a huge effort made. I can understand we may not see him this week. I still think we probably do, to be perfectly honest. Because again, this is a guy that loves being out there, loves competing, loves being with his teammates, and it absolutely destroyed him last year, not being able to do that. So I don't think he's going to miss an opportunity unless he absolutely has to, unless, there's just no getting around it. So I like I said, I think we see him at least for a little bit this week. I would be willing to put money on. I think he definitely plays the following week. It's just too important.
Yeah.
So unless there's something just horrifically wrong
Yeah.
that goes against what we're kind of being told, I just don't see him not playing in that game.
Yeah. I think you're right in terms of he's going to do everything in his power. I just, like I mentioned, for me, I just look at it of it is an injury to his throwing hand. So that's the only reason I have pause for it. But I do expect him to play against Oklahoma State too, just based on what we've said, how the fact that he did flash the thumbs up, like you talked about. I think that's where we should feel good about where Cam is at right now. But before we get to Oklahoma State, got Utah State coming up. Going to give our first little preview on this Aggies team in one moment. But first, I want to take an opportunity to talk to you all about our friends at 5 Hour Energy. Do you want to get in shape but have trouble staying motivated? Make 5 Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit. We all know that when we go to the gym sometimes, we're sitting in our car saying, I could still drive home. That's where 5 Hour Energy comes in. You can take that extra 5 Hour Energy shot to give you that feeling alertness so you can get after it in the weight room. I love 5 Hour Energy because they are a brand for hardworking people that people like you have trusted for over 20 years, to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You always know where to find 5 Hour Energy shots, right at the cash register at nearly every convenient and drug and grocery store nationwide. You can stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5 Hour Energy shots. If you go to 5hourenergy.com and use the number 5, once again, the number 5hourenergy.com and get some 5 Hour Energy products today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. You can go to 5hourenergy.com today and get yourself some 5 Hour Energy. Michelle, coming in to close this one out. Let's look ahead to Utah State. This is an Aggies team that we're probably going to see Bryson Barnes, Spencer Petras, I believe is the other quarterback. He may play, but I'm expecting it to be Barnes. I'll do a full breakdown later in the week. But look, Utah is still clearly the better team here, even without Cam Rising playing. I still feel extremely confident in Utah's chances to win. Utah State, I'm just going to be blunt, is going to have a hard time scoring because Utah is simply one of the best defenses in the nation. Someone could be listening and go, how can you say that? What statistical evidence will you have? Well, they completely shut Baylor down in the first half. They had negative yardage for most of the first quarter, in fact. Then how about just the fact that against Southern Utah, things were brutal? And some people will say, like, well, FCS team, inferior opponents, all of that. We saw Notre Dame struggle with an inferior opponent. I know it's Northern Illinois, which shout out that Northern Illinois program. That's a cool win. But once again, like Utah did what they were supposed to do, and then they followed it up with a great performance against Power 4 team. I think Utah State has some decent receivers. I don't think Utah State's going to get shut out. I have a hard time seeing Utah State scoring above 14 points, and I don't know if I'll go with more than 7 or 10 in my prediction because of the level this Utah defense is playing at right now.
Yeah, it's a tough ask for this Utah State team. They've been through a lot. Obviously, you have an interim head coach that was your DC, all this stuff with Blake Anderson, and now you're kind of looking at having a quarterback issue as well with injuries. And is it Spencer Petras? Is it going to be Bryson Barnes? It's just there's just been a lot going on with this team, and I think Utah's just in a little bit more of a stable place. And to your point, like, I think they've shown enough that it's hard to think that they can't handle this game. And that's not to say that Utah State's not going to play hard. Like, I don't think they're going to be like, oh, just take it and get out of here. Like, we saw what happened in 2012, which was the last time Utah actually went up to Logan. And I mean, crazy things happen. Crazy things do happen. I just don't think the crazy's happening this go around. I think this Utah team is too good. And I think there's just too much going on around this Utah State program. Other outside factors that they're having to deal with. I just don't think this is going to be their year to pull off the crazy unthinkable upset in the Battle of the Brothers.
I agree. I don't think it's happening. I think this Utah defense is just at another level. Like I said, I think they're going to hit him in the mouth. And I think that over time, it'll just wear him down. But still plenty of time to preview this matchup. We'll be discussing it all week long on Locked On Utes. Going to have some people on as well who cover the Utah State program. So looking forward to discussing all of that. But Michelle, always appreciate you taking the time to hop on. If people want to check out more of everything you have going on, where should they head over to?
Yeah, so definitely check out utezone.com. I am actually in the process of starting up senior features again, which I know was something that people really loved before I left Ute Zone, and now I'm back and we're bringing it back. And of course, you can always follow me on social media, on X, Threads, and Instagram. It's at Bodkin is a boss.
Michelle, thanks again for joining me.
No problem.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. But as I mentioned, a lot more to come as we get ready for week number 3 of Utah football. We hope you'll keep it here